Hello and welcome to She Leads Collective podcast. I'm Mary Gregory and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is a space for honest conversations about what it really means to lead as a woman today and how we can all show up with more courage, care and clarity. You'll hear from inspiring women, powerful allies and bold truth tellers who are changing the game, not by playing tougher, but by leading smarter, softer and stronger. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the She Leads Collective podcast. We are in a time of global crisis and deep division. So what kind of leadership does the world need now? In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by my long-term friend and colleague, Dr. Louise Austin, for what I hope will be a rich and honest and deeply reflective conversation, exploring what it means to be a whole leader in today's fractured world. Louise is a psychologist, senior lecturer, arts-based researcher, and integrative psychotherapist. Her work bridges the organisational and therapeutic worlds, and she brings profound insight into the inner dimensions of leadership that often go ignored. Together, we're intending to explore some of the undiscussables of modern leadership, how shame, power, fear, and vulnerability shape how we lead, relate, and show up. We'll be talking about the role of the unconscious, the pressure to perform, the risks of disconnection, and why genuine transformation always starts from within. This won't be a conversation about techniques or performance metrics. It's an invitation to slow down, look inward, and consider a different kind of leadership, one grounded in relationships, reflection, and responsibility. Let's get going. Hello, Louise, and thank you for being here.
Hi, Mary.
It's really good to see you. I'm finding it hard to believe that it's been such a long time since we've seen each other, and we go back such a long way to co-facilitating with Cosmopolitan, I remember, in the day, all those sorts of things. But you have moved on and grown and developed so much since those days, and I'd like you just to spend the first part of this conversation sharing a bit about your story.
Well, first of all, I'm just full of memories of you and I standing up together, running workshops for Cosmopolitan on presentation skills for women and assertiveness for women. And that was probably over 30 years ago.
Oh, goodness, you're making me feel old.
So it's been a long journey, hasn't it? And I think, my work has evolved over the years. For many years, the focus was, as you know, on leadership development. And then I trained as an integrative art psychotherapist. And so that meant I sat between two worlds of doing leadership development in large global organisations and then having this other completely different life as an art psychotherapist.
What drew you towards becoming an integrative art therapist?
I think I've always had a fascination in psychology, and I've always done arts-based experiential learning. So I think the two together really appealed to me. And also I just wanted to change a career.
Yes.
Actually, what happened was after 4 years of training as an integrative art psychotherapist, I had a vision which sent me off on a totally different track, which was I was so blown away about how to work in depth in a way that's really transformative.
Yes.
Using the arts. So I thought this would be great in business.
Fantastic.
So actually I kept the two worlds going.
Yes.
So until recently I worked in global organisations doing leadership development, but really bringing in psychology.
Yes.
Into the learning journey.
Yes.
And also doing that through arts-based methods.
Lovely.
And then just before COVID, as you know, I then decided to do a doctorate.
Yes, you did.
And the doctorate for me was like bringing the two sides of my world together of clinical thinking and organisational and transformative learning programs.
Yes. Yes.
Because what I was exploring was the educator learner relationship from a
Yes.
psychodynamic perspective.
Already you're blowing my mind, and you're probably blowing the mind of many of our listeners as you speak. But before we go down that, there's something I wanted to hold with for a moment, which is when you were working with big organisations in leadership development, bringing in the art therapy and supporting leaders' development through using creative media. Can you give us an example of the sorts of things you did?
So it could be anything from, let's offer something really simple, which was inviting leaders to think in metaphor. So if I ask, who are you as a leader? I'm going to get something very descriptive and probably coming from the place of ego.
Yes.
This is how much I know.
Yes.
If I ask the question, what are you like as a leader? And what does it feel like to be a leader in this organisation? Something really different opens up. If I then say, if you want to explore the dynamics of your team, we can talk about it. But if you were to make an image of what you imagine it feels like to be in this team, that image gives very different information to just that top line surface explanation.
It does. It brings out things that wouldn't ordinarily get expressed.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I can see it straight away how it contributes to a much deeper level of experience, and therefore opens up that possibility of transformation as well.
And I think it's not only just deeper. I mean, I've just been recently running a workshop actually with a group of therapists this weekend, but one of the things that came up was someone said to me, I expected to come here and look at a PowerPoint, take notes, and sort of be fed information. She said, I never expected it to be experiential or to be using the arts. And what she said was, it immediately brings in the body. It becomes an embodied way of exploring our experience.
Yes.
And that can throw up all kinds of surprises and insights.
Yes, absolutely. So tell us then a bit more about your PhD and what you studied in your doctorate.
Well, I think first of all, I'll start with the experience of doing a PhD. First of all, when people say, would you recommend it? And I'd say it's definitely not for everyone because it's a very lonely journey. But also, for me, it was utterly transformative because I was really forced to look at a subject in depth and to go even further. And I think a lot of people that do a PhD come out thinking, gosh, I feel really humble about what I don't know. So you don't come out of a PhD feeling an expert. You sort of come out with a real sort of humility.
Wow, that's such a different perspective from someone with a PhD gets the title doctor.
I know.
And immediately you think, oh, yes, they are an expert. But the fact that you actually end up thinking there's so much more than I don't know.
There's so much more I don't know. But in terms of the content, I wanted to look at what is transformative about the relationship between, let's say, a coach and a coachee, or a leader and a team, or from my perspective, a group facilitator and the group that I'm working with. And so it takes a different turn from, rather than me having a box of techniques that I'm very good at and I deploy those techniques, and from doing that, I do something which is transformative. It's saying, let's look at our relationship.
Lovely.
And what's happening in the relationship.
Yep.
Now, what that means, and this is why it was so personally transformative for me, is even now when you and I are having a conversation, I'm thinking about our relationship, is what happens when we put ourselves into the alchemical pot of transformation rather than sitting on the outside.
Yes.
That we really realise that we are the ones that can either block transformation in others, or we can be a help.
Yes.
Simply through being in the relationship rather than being out of relationship.
So this is very meaningful what you're sharing here, because everything does happen. I believe leadership is a relational activity.
Exactly.
So everything happens in relation to others. As a leader, it's very hard to be a leader if you can't relate and can't take people with you and work collaboratively with them. But in terms of the quality that you're talking about, there's a certain need as a leader to be mindful, to be conscious and to be intentional around your relationships. And yet in so many organisations, it's so busy How many leaders do you feel, are able to actually give that level of consciousness to their relationships?
I think that's a big problem we're facing. I think we're facing a crisis of leadership, and I think that we live in a world, and I'm probably going to focus on the Western world because that's the world I know better.
Yes.
But I think in organisations there is a real drive for productivity, for skills-based learning, for measuring competence, and everything which is observable.
Yeah.
So if you do lots and you're really busy and you're really productive, you'll get a lot of points for that, because that's what the organisation is looking for. Relationships are messy and they're more complex and you're more likely to fail. So it's downplayed as not important because performance takes the role of king in an organisation rather than people. And this, for me personally, is what creates a crisis. So a book I was reading recently called Workplace Vulnerability was just talking about, some of the issues that people are facing in work, from burnout, classic one, from leaving because you have a really bad relationship with your boss, from abuse within organisations, from bad decisions being made, willful blindness, and people being scared to call it out. So there are issues there that are not being tackled with because the leader thinks the best way to be a leader is to be productive.
And there's something missing there. There's a disconnect, because it's about, I want everyone to perform and to be productive, and the gap is actually it starts with me and how I'm being with others to create that performance and that production.
Well, so I call it whole leadership.
Right.
Becoming a whole leader. And it's sort of an evolution from being an authentic leader. And I think my experience of, in particular, running programs with people who are just moving into leadership, I genuinely believe that there are many leaders who choose to become a leader because they actually want to be a whole leader, want to be an authentic leader.
Yes.
So when I'll ask the question, what motivated you to become a leader? Most of them will say people. I love working with people. I love watching people grow. So actually the aspiration is completely there. It's then what happens when you get the job title and then you'll be measured against productivity and performance. So I think for me what a whole leader is a leader that has taken the really brave, courageous step to do their own work, to do their own inner work. And so that almost feels paradoxical, that in order to focus on the team that you're running and the people that you're working with, the requirement then is to look within to yourself. And it is through you doing that kind of depth work and developing your self-awareness and self-knowledge that can really help you attend to the quality of relationships you and your team.
And what that's bringing up for me, I absolutely agree that the work as a leader has to start with yourself first. But I've also experienced leaders who are resistant to doing that work. I can think of one leader in particular who brought me in to fix his team. He tried his best to do what he could do, but he wanted me to fix them. And when I asked him, what about where you're at? He was completely, don't want to go there. So how do you engage leaders who may be that fearful and that unwilling to enter into working on themselves?
Well, I'll take it back to myself.
Yes.
Because I'm a leader.
Yes.
I run groups. I run different groups. So I step into that leadership role. So I'll bring in my own resistances. Of course I feel resistant to looking at my own material, because let's say I'm running a group and something goes wrong. My ego part will go, gosh, they're so resistant. They're resistant to change. And so it's easy for me to look at the group and say they're resistant.
Yes.
What becomes harder is my fear of addressing my own vulnerability, my own mistakes, my own failures, and taking responsibility for that. It's much easier to blame others. So of course we get resistance. And I think in particular what is not addressed often when we start to look at what does it mean to be a whole leader, it means we have to look at two very uncomfortable topics. The first of all is shame. The second one is power.
Okay.
And I think the two can set the other off. So for me to look at doing my own inner work, I may touch on what makes me feel a sense of shame, of maybe I didn't get it right with the group. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it was something I said which caused a rupture in the group. So that could take me to a place of shame. But also when I think about power, when I start to do my own inner work, I've got to look at power and what's my relationship with power. And that can be uncomfortable.
What do you think's at the root of that discomfort? I'm not necessarily asking you to share your own story here, just the sorts of examples you've come across.
So I think what comes to mind when you ask that question, Mary, is first of all, what do we get from our own power? Mm-hmm. Is the allure of being in a powerful position and the privilege that we have when we step into that leadership role, which we might deny by saying, oh, we're all friends here, or we're all equal. Well, we're not, because in that moment, I have a position of power that can feel very uncomfortable. So that's the feeling of being powerful. The other flip side of it is the terror of feeling powerless, of losing control, of thinking a group doesn't respect me. I'm thinking, if we're really going to talk contextually, Keir Starmer at the moment with the welfare bill, and reading the newspapers, what has he been called? He's lost control of the parliament. He's a weak man. He's not a strong man.
So a leader who doesn't have power is considered weak.
Is considered weak.
Yeah. And is that the reality? Is he really weak? Because you could say from the perspective of, we get the story that's reported in the papers and he's labelled weak, but that doesn't make him personally weak.
Well, and this is why it's such an interesting discussion where we start to get into power, because there's the having power, having levels of authority, which means I can do things that other people can't. For example, if I'm a leader in a company, I can hire and fire. That is a reality. But it's also a quality that we assign to the word power. So if power means strong, it means if I'm seen as powerless, means I'm weak.
I'm just curious because there's the whole thing about effective leadership today is considered leaders having the ability to be vulnerable. And yet vulnerability is often associated with being weak as well. So there's a real conundrum.
There really is. And it's something that I've really explored in myself. So, for example, I wrote an article called The Wounded Facilitator, looking at my own vulnerability, to really explore what do I really mean when I'm talking about the word vulnerable. And actually my thesis was exploring the leader's vulnerability. And so what do we mean by vulnerable? And we've got different definitions, but for me, from an experiential, experiencing vulnerability is, first of all, experiencing how admitting we get impacted. Things hurt us. I'm thinking of Keir Starmer now. I bet he's not feeling great today. But also, there's a robustness that comes from dealing with our own emotional experiences and acknowledging it and naming it. There's a strength that comes from a leader standing in front of an organisation and naming his or her or their emotional experience. That means they've done the work in even to get to that place of being able to name emotional experience. And that gives permission then for the rest of the organisation to do that. But that's a journey.
It absolutely is, and a journey that many leaders do not go on, which brings us back to the world today. This whole theme of our conversation is how to be a whole leader in a divided world. The world today is full of challenges, full of crises. And I've heard it said the leadership that we see today is obsolete for what the world needs. I'm just wondering what your views are on that.
Oh gosh, a lot. I think I've been thinking a lot about, that we live in a polycrisis.
Yes.
And actually to such an extent, and when we say polycrisis, for me, it's everything from climate change and the impact of that to increasing division around poverty and privilege, the haves and the have-nots, through to war happening in the world today. And it's what Otto Scharmer calls the narrative of destruction and a paradigm of separation. And for me, I cannot do any of the work that I do without framing it within a polycrisis, to ground it in the reality of what we're facing, the wake-up call. The story of the polycrisis is one of division and increasing division. So taking it back to whole leadership, and this is for me and the work I do as well, is that everything I do is about how do we foster connection in a divided world. Now, for me, the tools I use or the knowledge I use is psychology, depth psychology, and using arts-based methods as a method. But the purpose is that it's about connection and attending to the quality of relationships. And unless we move from division to connection, the polycrisis will continue.
Because there's something about, it's not just connecting with ourselves, but connecting with others.
And the planet.
And the planet as the whole, and accepting that we're all one, which some people will say, oh, that's too woo-woo. But actually, till we actually accept that we are all in this together, we're not going to solve the complex issues that are arising. And I think the other thing that comes up for me is, how has our approach been going so far? It's not been going that well. So why don't we try a different approach? Because that actually might work out a lot better.
Well, and I agree with that. I've just been doing a training with Otto Scharmer, who came up with the Theory U, a real systems perspective of working with organisations. Yes. But his latest one is on presencing. And he began with a great question, which is, why are we still producing the results that no one wants and it doesn't work? Why are we doing that? And it's a real sort of, yes, why are we doing that? And so I think there are a number of thought leaders around the world, of which I would name Otto Scharmer as one of them. Marianne Williamson is another, that are saying that the leadership that we have now, not only is it obsolete, but it is not helping us deal with a polycrisis. In fact, it's created a polycrisis. And so for me, in any group, I bring in the word polycrisis to remind us that's the work that we're doing. We're working within the context of a crisis, and that's our reality.
Absolutely. And what I'm processing there is also, we're talking about this as being how to be a whole leader in a world that is so divided. But there's also how can we connect more with our loving side and be a more loving leader, rather than an ego-driven, fear-based leader, which again I think is what fuels the division. If we look at all the division that's going on, it's all very much fear-based, and all of that is ego. So what are your thoughts on how we can create a more loving approach to our leadership?
Well, it may come in as a slightly different angle to sort of work towards loving. Because when I think about what is a whole leader, and I mentioned earlier about what is an authentic leader. An authentic leader for me, when I'm being an authentic leader, that my measuring stick would be when I notice an undiscussable and I name it. I bring what's the elephant in the room, what's been marginalised, and what's been avoided, and I name it. So that for me is an authentic leader. A whole leader for me is different, because that's where I go into depth psychology. A whole leader recognises that there is another part of the psyche, which is the unconscious. All the aspects of myself that I deny or I don't know, that has been pushed down. So the ego part is the face that I put out there. That's my persona, the acceptable part. But the unconscious can be the dumping ground for the parts that I deny in order to be accepted in a culture. So when we're saying what does it mean to do the work as a whole leader, it means going down into the depths, which is not a popular route to go in this world of fast-paced working, to take it slow and to see what's the unknown in me and how can I make that known. So what does that mean where love is concerned? It means that I have to look at the parts of myself that I don't like, that I have repressed and forgotten, and to do work that makes that conscious. And that to me is what love is all about. It's accepting our darkness and our light.
Yes.
And until I accept it in myself, I can't bring that out into my outer relationships. For me, at 64, I see that as a lifetime's work. It's a lifetime's work. And I think something that you and I have spoken about before, when we're talking about what does it mean to be a whole leader, I think that's a job for us all. I think we're all leaders. We can all be agents of change, which I think is what Marianne Williamson talked about. And our job is to start with self-compassion.
To start with us, it always comes back to self first. Whenever there's anything that's like, oh, I don't like what's going on over here, or I don't like what they are doing, it's actually look to yourself first before you even consider addressing what might be going on there first. I mean, I do know of an organisation actually who their ethos around leading teams is that if a team isn't performing, they invite the leader of that team to go and have a look at how they're being and what's going on for them. And that's quite unusual. I think that's really powerful. I wish more organisations took that approach where it's like, don't keep pointing the finger at others, but actually look at how you're being as a leader of that team that might be creating the circumstances where people aren't performing. I think that's very powerful.
Well, that's the word I was going to use. I think that's really powerful work to do. And, it's interesting as I'm hearing you, I can imagine the counter argument coming up, which is, oh, well, that sounds very self-blaming. So it's not your fault, actually, it's my fault. And of course, that's not what you, myself, and other people who are doing this kind of work are talking about. It's not moving from blame to self-blame, but it's around ownership. And there's a lot of personal power in that when we own our own stuff. Now, I think an organisation that becomes a whole organisation, so going from whole leadership to whole organisation, create spaces, reflective spaces, where they can sit around and say, what is going on? And so everybody is exploring their stuff collaboratively and together.
But how common do you find that in organisations today?
I think it's something quite new, in the sense of the last 3 years, as part of my thesis, how I've disseminated my thesis has been running reflective practice groups, arts-based reflective practice groups. The feedback I get is this feels new.
Yeah.
And I will also get feedback like this feels very countercultural, because we're doing the opposite to the culture of the organisation, which is slowing down, going deep, focusing on our relationships and bringing our emotional process into the space. And that is not met with, oh, this feels very common, we do this all the time. It feels, oh gosh, this feels new. And
I've also had it feels uncomfortable.
And that's exactly that.
Because people are so used to doing all the time, to suddenly have that space to reflect, like, well, what do I do with this space?
And I know for myself, doing my own reflective practice myself, of course it brings up uncomfortable stuff, because we've got time to think about things. And then what comes up are things that we've not been looking at, we've not been addressing, because we haven't given time for it. So, for example, in the groups that I run, and they're quite small groups often, the starting point is, this is going to be fun. As in, oh, thank goodness, I get time to have some time to slow down and rest and be grounded. But actually what comes up is, and then really uncomfortable material comes up that we haven't been addressing or thinking about. When we turn the lens back on ourselves, we might then be facing and confronting material that is uncomfortable and could feel hazardous. So it reflective practice sounds quite gentle, doesn't it?
It does,
but actually it's tough work. It's doing the work.
Well, it's getting you to look at yourself and do that what needs to be done for yourself, and that's often what we want to avoid or resist. It's much easier to put it onto somebody else, isn't it?
Well, and it's much easier it's much easier to call it woo-woo. I mean, where did that word come from? Woo-woo. What people find hardest to do, which is looking at themselves, is almost dismissed as being, well, we had it, all of our work together, Mary, soft skills.
Yes.
And you and I
soft and fluffy.
And you and I would be saying, okay, now let's see how soft it is, when people at the end of workshops with us would go, that was really hard. I absolutely get that, and I want to move on, because I want to talk about whole leadership again and bring our focus there. A whole leader is someone who is okay with discussing
the undiscussables, because I think some of the challenges organisations face, particularly if they want people to perform and people to be engaged, is that they don't necessarily have those conversations or talk about the things that need to be talked about, because undiscussables are a more in-depth conversation. And as you mentioned earlier, organisations are very good at just skimming the surface. How can we get or support leaders and develop cultures in organisations that will make it more accessible for them to talk about the undiscussables?
I mean, this is where trust and relationship comes in.
Yes.
I mean, for example, for me, and I'm sure for you working as a coach and working with groups, is without basic trust, no one's going to discuss anything. I wouldn't.
Yes.
You know, if I was in a group where I felt unsafe, or a team, I am not going to discuss the undiscussable because it may have ramifications. I may lose my job, for example. So basic trust has to be the foundation. And without that, there's no point going there, because you actually create a dangerous organisation by forcing people to discuss the undiscussables. For example, having a whistle-blowing policy in place, which actually is not a safe process, where the whistleblower is then found out to be a whistleblower and then loses their jobs, but then become blacklisted in an industry. So trust has to be fundamental. And this is where the trust comes, I believe, the trust comes from knowing that senior leaders have done the work. It always goes back to that. I will trust somebody if I know that everything they are saying, they have done before me. So if they are inviting emotional intelligence as a key aspect of culture, the first question I would ask is, how has the senior leadership team done work on that? And if they feel that that's not necessary for them, then my argument would be, you'll not get the culture change that you're hoping for.
Because they're not bringing it alive in their own behaviour.
They're not bringing
comes
it
back to their own behaviour. But also, I just want to flag, because for our listeners actually, what we mean by undiscussables, I mean, you referred to something there, you didn't actually name an example, but you're referring to something that maybe was big and meaty that needed to be addressed, and therefore somebody blows the whistle on it. But also an undiscussable is anything that could be a withhold. So, I used the example that, some of the team stuff I do, you might find the CEO favoured one team member over another, which caused resentment on the team. Now that to many might think, well, that's just a small thing, but that's absolutely the sort of thing that if it doesn't get surfaced and cleared up, will hamper the team's performance. Even the little things, it's being mindful of those micro moments and how you're showing up as a leader, how you're treating different people on your team, and how that impacts the whole team. And as a holistic leader, what you're suggesting is we have that level of consciousness, that willingness to notice, recognise for ourselves why we might be doing that, and heal what we might need to heal as well.
And I think as you're saying that, and that's really helpful, isn't it, about, grounding in day-to-day team reality, is how a leader brings that into the open. And I came across something I was reading the other day, and I thought, I'm going to remember that, which is a very simple intervention, which is, what is the most difficult question we are not asking in this space right now?
What a fantastic question.
That's your undiscussable.
Yes.
What is the most difficult issue that we are doing everything to avoid addressing right now in this space? And so going back to your example that you brought in, it could be actually the most uncomfortable, difficult question that is happening right now is, why are you favouring this person over the rest of the team? That's my most difficult question I'm bringing into this space.
So it takes real courage.
And that takes courage.
Yeah.
And those questions will only ever be asked if whoever is holding the power goes first.
Or whoever isn't holding the power is very, very brave.
Is very brave.
Yeah.
Because when you don't have the power and you take that stance, then it may feel like you're going into dangerous territory, but not if there's trust. I mean, the whole work that has been done on psychological safety, is if there's psychological safety.
That makes it much more likely to have those conversations.
And the challenging thing about psychological safety, which is sometimes forgotten when people talk about it, psychological safety is built when people take risks. And in my experience, and certainly for me, and I'm sure for you, when you're running groups, when you're stepping into that leadership role, unless you take the risks first. So I'm always going back to that same
leader
principle.
always goes first.
Unless you take that risk first, why would anyone else do it?
I'm going to move us on slightly because, the purpose of this podcast is all about getting the conversation going around gender equity and how masculine and feminine energies, and that I believe that we all, men and women, all possess a mixture of those energies. Where does whole leadership fit in to that conversation?
Well, when I approach that subject, I will hold my daughter in mind, who is in her 20s and moves in a circle where people identify themselves as non-binary, gender fluid and polyamorous. So it's been a whole new... So I've learned more about gender from my children than I think for all the reading I've done around what does it mean to be a feminist. So
Yes.
I'm bringing her into the midst here when we approach that question. When I did my thesis, I came at it from a perspective of Jungian psychology. And certainly from Jungian psychologist's perspective, there's this whole notion of male and female energies that Jung called the animus, which is the male energy, and anima, which is the female energy. And rightly so, that was an aspect of his conceptual scheme that has been pulled apart by feminists.
Yeah.
Because the danger is gender essentialism, which is strength becomes positioned as a male quality and emotion and emotional intelligence becomes a female quality. What we're learning is to approach this in a non-binary way, is to take away the gender and focus on the qualities so we can all be loving. It is not something which is assigned to a particular gender. So what for me is going back to the whole leader is exciting, actually, is that we are made up of a pluralistic universe of multiple qualities, and it doesn't need to be assigned to gender. It is the who we are.
I find that freeing to hear because, what runs through my mind is this whole thing about when a man behaves assertively, he's considered a leader. When a woman behaves assertively, she's considered bossy. Wouldn't that be wonderful if actually any of these qualities are for all genders, whatever gender you are? Wouldn't it be fantastic to get to that day where you're not labelled as, because you're a woman and you're assertive, you become bossy?
Well, and then we have to, and this is where criticality comes in.
Yes.
This has been my journey, I would say, probably the last 10 years of really thinking about what does it mean to be a feminist and how to be a feminist in a patriarchal world and a divided world.
Yes.
It does mean that you become the person who says, can I just pick up on that word you just used?
Yes. Yes.
I noticed that I was referred to in joking terms of, Louise has been bossy. So to be the one who goes, well, actually, can we explore the word bossy? Then sets up another level, which is, now Louise is picking up on everything.
Yes.
But we have to. We really have to pay attention to those labels that come towards us, but also because this is internalized patriarchy, how we then might assign it to other women. I've got a son and a daughter. I have learned firsthand that I've done it myself. So it's a journey, and it's a hard journey to take to start to pick apart all of these qualities that we're assigning to different people.
And I think from my experience, I probably get it wrong more than right, and that's why the self-compassion is so important.
Yeah, because otherwise you won't do the work.
Because we're all just learning this. Yeah, we're all newbies to this, really. So I'm really mindful we've covered some really gorgeous topics today. We've gone into quite a lot of depth. And the theme is how to be a leader in a divided world. So I want to just start moving towards a close here by inviting you to summarise what are some of the things people could actually take on that would help them move towards being a more whole leader.
I think if you asked me that every single day for a year, I'd give you a different answer. So I think, given our conversation leading up to this, I am going to quote the book I brought in for you, which is by a female activist and lawyer, human rights lawyer, and many other things, Valerie Kaur, who wrote a book called See No Stranger. In a time of rage, how do we lead with love? And I'm only just started reading it, so I'm not going to say too much, but the first opening is a statement which she says, begin with wonder. If you wonder about people and you approach them with curiosity in a way of openness and a desire to learn about every single person that you meet with wonder, which is of course what children do, you can then move on to the second part, which is the brave part, which is you are a part of me that I'm yet to know.
Wow.
Which means in our opponents, in people that we find difficult or challenging situations, to imagine that we are part of a whole, which is the whole leadership part, means I take ownership for those ruptures in relationship.
Yes.
I have a part to play.
So that part that we're seeing or experiencing in someone, I mean, I can think of people that irritate me, for example. It's like, what am I not owning in myself?
Exactly.
What is the work that I haven't done on myself yet?
Exactly.
Because that's actually quite a gift. Even though at the time you might be feeling irritated, it's a gift that they are presenting something to you that you can then go and look at.
And that's doing the work.
It is doing the work. That is so powerful. And I love the whole thing about wonder and curiosity, because that immediately suggests to me suspending judgment.
Exactly.
And it's judgment that causes a division.
Yes.
That's ego again, isn't it?
Exactly.
Gosh, Louise, really powerful stuff.
And thank you. I've loved the conversation, and we're having an important conversation for what is going on in the world. We talked about polycrisis, and it's these kind of conversations that matter.
Yes, absolutely, because each of us has the power to make a difference in our zone of influence, I guess, or wherever we are. You know, we're all agents of change, as you mentioned earlier. So yes, I think a really important conversation for us all to get, that we can all make a difference.
Thank you, Mary.
If people want to connect with you, where can they connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn as Dr. Louise Austin.
Fantastic. If anyone wants to find out more about Louise, connect with her on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the She Leads Collective podcast. If this episode resonated with you, follow the show or share it with a friend and leave a quick review below. Or leave us a comment. Change happens through conversation, so let's keep this one going. Listen out for the next episode and join me as we keep lifting the lid on the stories that matter. Take care and keep leading with heart.